Good evening. Welcome to Focus on Albany. I am at Taste in downtown Albany. I'm at a reception to kick off the 2015 legislative session. In the course of this evening, I will be interviewing newsmakers and politicians to find out from them what they feel the most important issues are. I'm with Assemblyman Angelo Santa Barbara. Hi, how are you?
Good, Cynthia. How are you?
I'm doing great. Now, tomorrow is the State of the State.
Yes.
And you'll be tackling some important issues this year. What are the three most important issues that you feel are on the agenda?
Well, one of the things that we're looking to take on this year is to really get this broadband service out to the rural parts of my district, upstate communities, and the whole region. There are still areas that don't have reliable internet service, and it really causes a problem for educational opportunities and also for businesses. Businesses look for this type of infrastructure before they choose to locate in any particular area, and certainly want to have that infrastructure for our rural parts, our upstate cities. Our farmers are looking for access to this type of infrastructure. So we're going to be pushing for that state investment. The new New York Broadband Fund is a good, admirable program, but I'd like to see those investment dollars come into the 111th because I think it's desperately needed there. We also want to continue fighting for our education funding for our public schools. We want to eliminate the GEA as soon as possible and get that funding back to where it belongs. Doing good work for our children, and investment in our children is a smart investment in our communities, and it means a bright future for all New Yorkers. And of course, we want to continue to make sure that the upstate economy remains a top priority. They keep pushing for reinvestment in our upstate cities. We just heard the announcement for a casino in the upstate area, making that area a destination, building on the economic development that we've been working on over the past couple of years. Continue to invest, and hopefully that private investment will follow, and it means a lot for our small businesses, it means a lot for tax relief, and so much more for our families.
And what will you be focusing on this session?
Well, upstate economy will be one of the primary focus points, but also there's local bills that I'll be working on, things to encourage investment, private investments, to encourage revitalization, reuse of infrastructure.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Happy New Year.
I'm with Barbara Bartoletti, and she's with the League of Women Voters. Your title?
Legislative Director for the New York State League of Women Voters.
Now, what do you feel are the three most important issues that are coming up this session?
Well, for the League, the three most important issues are: one, education; two, we will deal with women's economic as well as reproductive justice, and we will probably deal with quite a bit of the environmental issues, and of course, the League wouldn't be the League without dealing with good government issues.
Now, what, in your opinion, is your priority for this session?
Actually, our priority is education this year. We were plaintiffs back, got to be 13 years ago now, on the CFE case, which was decided by the Court of Appeals here in New York, and actually deals with making sure that every child in New York State gets a sound basic education. And for the League, what that is particularly important is it means that we will have very well-informed voters. And unfortunately, right now, we have some high-needs districts here in New York that are not getting the kind of funding that our other wealthier districts are getting. So we are looking to the governor to put in more education funding to bring those high-needs districts up to a place where all of our students here in New York State get a sound basic education, which will then, for the League's interest, make them not only more economically able to support their families, but make them better citizens so that they can really participate in our democratic democracy. So that will be one of our priorities. We are also very opposed to what we think the governor is going to put forward in his budget, which is an investment tax credit for education, which actually will take money away from the state coffers and make a tax credit for the wealthiest New Yorkers to make them able to drive down their state income tax. But in the same time, what it does is it takes money away from the state coffers, where we hope much money will go to state education.
Okay, thank you, Barbara.
You are very welcome. Thank you.
I'm with Pat Fahey, who is the Assemblywoman in the 109th. I'm glad you're with us tonight, Pat.
Thank you. Thank you. Great to be here.
Well, tomorrow's the start of the, new legislative session. What are the three most important issues you feel are facing the people in New York?
Well, I think one of the first and foremost things will be this $5 billion quote-unquote surplus funding. Making sure that we invest those surplus funds properly will be very important. Infrastructure, but making sure we maximize the number of jobs coming out of that infrastructure investment, especially for youth. So that's number one, because I think that money is right there now. Secondly, education, making sure we have the proper investment in education will be very important, and trying to fight some of the criticisms, if you will. So education, I'm afraid, is going to dominate the agenda yet again. And then jobs across the board, whether they're jobs for after-school programs, jobs for youth, some of the critical economic development needs that we have will also be very important. So there's quite a few things on the docket.
What is your most pressing issue?
My most pressing one, I think, will probably be making sure the funding, that we have more equitable funding, whether it's the infrastructure funds, whether it's some of our economic development investments, or whether it's some of our education. Making sure that we are targeting areas most in need where we can get the best turnaround on the dollar.
But don't you think because of the windfall that's going to happen?
Well, the windfall can be spent in many different places. That $5 billion, a lot of people have their eyes on that, and I want to make sure we maximize the most number of jobs for it.
Thank you, Assemblywoman.
Thank you.
I am with
Ruth Hassel Thompson with the 36th Senatorial District, Westchester, and the Bronx.
What are the three most important issues that you will be addressing this year?
I'm on the Judiciary Committee and on crime victims, and corrections. And so obviously I'm very excited about the fact that the governor has put one of my bills, which is the raise the age, in the budget. And some of the juvenile justice reforms that we've been pushing very hard for, so I'm very excited to make sure that stays in the budget. And certainly a livable wage for women, particularly because the numbers of single-head of households are rising every year, and women have to be able to make a livable wage. I want a better education bill. I know that we're going to be exploring again the fact of mayoral control for New York City, and I'm very hopeful that we will ensure that the elements of making sure that children in New York City get a better education really get addressed this year.
Well, with the cost of living, not only upstate but in New York City, do you think 1010 is equitable?
I'm sorry, do I think
that it's an adequate wage?
No, absolutely not. And I think that I looked at the proposal that talks about a different living wage for upstate versus New York City. And I think it's very appropriate because the cost of living in New York City is spiraling out of control. And people cannot subsist on the wage that they're being paid. But at the same time, I'm just as concerned about what happens to farm workers as well, and what's happening to our farms and agriculture overall. So those are two balances I think that we have to achieve for both upstate and downstate.
Now, what with the fact that the Republicans are in the majority, do you think a lot will get accomplished in the Senate this year?
I think Republicans, like everybody else, are going to be forced to accomplish something this year. I think even, Republicans won the Senate, but they didn't win the Senate to be silly. They won the Senate to get something done. And I think that that's the expectation that they recognize that people want to have happen. And we're not going to have the kind of stalemate in the state Senate that we have down in Washington, D.C., because the people of New York are not going to stand for it.
Now, what issue will you be most addressing this year?
Me personally, judges.
More women judges?
Always.
Thank you. Thank you. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. Thank you.
I'm with Tracy Brooks, and Tracy is a woman's advocate with
Family Planning Advocates of New York State.
Now, what do you think are the most important issues facing women this session?
Well, we certainly do need to get the Women's Equality Agenda passed. It's the third year that we'll be working on it. We see a lot of support on both sides of the aisle for the majority of this piece of legislation, but the women in the state of New York, as well as the voters in the state of New York, believe that the entire agenda should be passed, and we shouldn't be having legislators picking and choosing which rights women should have. So not only is pay equity or pregnancy accommodation important, but certainly securing Roe versus Wade in the New York state law. And then we would move beyond to bigger, larger questions like paid family leave, affordable child care, potentially minimum wage as well.
Now, do you think with the state Senate in Republican hands that the 10 planks will be enacted?
I do think that there's room to still have conversations with the Republicans in the Senate. They believe that Roe versus Wade should be the law of the land. All we're asking for it is to be the law of New York State specifically. So there's a lot of room for conversation. It's only January. I have a lot of faith that we'll be able to come together and have very strong, good conversations to move forward where the women in the state of New York need.
Now, how do you feel about the Women's Equality Party?
Anything that helps us really profile that right now there's not economic parity in the state of New York for both genders is important. Anytime we have the ability to talk about the fact we have some antiquated laws on the book that haven't kept pace with women's participation in society is important. So any avenue, any organization, any party that helps highlight those points for the voter, I think is always helpful.
What is your most important issue this session?
Our most important issue is really split between the budget. It's always important to make sure that there's full access to comprehensive reproductive health care for everybody in the state, regardless of their socioeconomic status. Certainly, we'd like to see the full Women's Equality Agenda passed. And finally, we need to do some legislative fixes for access to contraceptive.
Thank you, Tracy. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
I'm with Blair Horner from NYPIRG. Hi, Blair.
How are you? Happy New Year.
What do you think the three most important issues facing New Yorkers are?
Well, I mean, that's a tough one. The session's issues are going to be a little bit different than sort of the bigger issues for the state. But clearly, the migration of the population out of New York State to other places, I think that's an issue that doesn't have easy answers because really it's an issue of the Midwest and Northeast. But it has an impact on the state's economy and its tax revenues. I think the issue of certainly the issue of sort of ethics writ large, and increasingly the public's alienation from its own government is not a good thing. And again, it's another complicated, big problem.
Why do you think that is?
That it's complicated or that it's an issue?
That it's an issue.
Well, part of it is democracy is made up of humans, and in any human endeavor, you're going to have people who are angels, and some people who are bums, and most people in the middle. And you try to design state programs or federal programs to keep the people in the middle behaving honestly. And in New York, we have very weak enforcement of the laws that we have. And it's mainly because the watchdogs are not sufficiently independent of their appointing authorities. And that creates the conflict where you have to end up relying on the U.S. Attorney's Office to bring justice on the ethical front. So I think those are two big ones. The third one would be one that's sort of tied in with, I think, the whole planet, which is climate change and the impact it has on our public health and the environment that we'll all be living in years to come. So those would be three that I would pick. I'm sure others could think of more.
What's your most important? What will you be focusing on? What will NYPIRG be focusing on this session?
Well, we have many hats that we wear, and so just to cover quickly the waterfront, we are particularly interested in climate change. The Public Service Commission has proceedings called the Reforming Energy Vision, which is dealing with shifting from fossil fuel power, we're hoping, to alternative energy power. That's a big one. We'll also be working very diligently to try to get some sort of political and ethics reform passed. The system certainly doesn't work the way it is now. On higher education, nationwide, the second highest consumer debt in America now are college loans. Over $1.2 trillion in outstanding debt. And we think public policy should be designed to reduce the costs and to help people that have the debt to be able to pay it off. So on the environmental front, on education front, on the political front, and certainly in healthcare, this year is the first year the state has to fully foot the bill for the Affordable Care Act, which provides health insurance, additional health insurance to about 1 million New Yorkers. And so we're going to want to make sure that program stays in place. So those will be some of the big ones for us.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
This is Cynthia Pooler from Focus on Albany. We've had a very lively discussion with a number of people, and I want to say good night, and I will be talking to all of you during the legislative session. Happy New Year.